Well, hi everyone. I'm the director for our New Zealand not-for-profit registered educational charitable trust called Common Knowledge. And I've been doing this You in Childbirth series now for a few weeks. I'm on number 37. Got a lot to say. I've been involved in childbirth for 50 years, so I do have a lot to say. And I've seen a lot of changes since when I first gave birth in 1970, last gave birth in 1982, and have been involved in the global conversation over the past 50 years, and the founder and director of our New Zealand Charitable Trust since the 1990s. So I want to talk to you about non-laboring cesareans. As it says in the description, when I gave birth in 1970 in the United States, there was a 4.5% cesarean rate. This statistic is often used by the natural birth movement to say, see, women can give birth naturally. They don't need cesareans. Because I lived through this time, I can explain how we sort of got to where we are. And it's important, but more important than how we got to where we are, the importance is how do we societally view childbirth? And that's really what our trust is about, because our trust holds all the skills that hundreds of fathers and mothers developed in the 70s, as well as a concept that it just should be normal and natural when you're pregnant to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing your baby, no matter where birth occurs, no matter who's present, no matter your circumstances or beliefs, no matter your choices or your lack of choices or the change of choices, or what happens to or around you. We get pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth. And it's an activity that each woman does with her baby, no matter the circumstances. So when I gave birth in 1970, cesareans were considered life-saving, and women didn't necessarily like the experience. They were unconscious. It was major abdominal surgery. And it was very difficult to have a VBAC after a classical cesarean. But it was considered life-saving. We were considered to be the lucky ones living in modern countries where a cesarean was possible. That began to change in the 1980s, and this is where how we got here and what our society says to each other is very, very important. So that concept that when pregnant, it's just normal and natural to learn birth and birth coaching skills and then use the skills to work through your baby's birth journey never took off, because there was a small but then larger natural birth movement. And the natural birth movement, as all of us know, is sort of the oppositional movement. It's like natural birth versus medical birth, home birth versus hospital birth, midwives versus obstetricians, women who have natural birth versus women who have cesareans. That didn't have to happen. And this is what our trust is trying to change, because every woman is doing the birth with her baby, no matter how she gives birth. And every family values their own baby's birth. We don't really care how someone else has their baby. We care about our birth. And so when there's a societal message that's grown since the 70s that cesareans aren't real births, this is demeaning. And this is what women are doing to one another and have been since the 80s, because it's primarily women in the natural birth movement. There's nothing wrong with people who don't ever want to see a doctor, who want to do a birth alone, who feel that the medical profession is ramming their skills up our bodies. There's nothing wrong with that attitude. That's your birth, and you have the right to emotionally feel that way, and you have the right to act on your beliefs. The same way when your kid gets sick, when you take it to a doctor or not, or when you get sick. When do you seek medical care, and for what reasons? And what do you do when you do? However, it isn't okay to have a societal message that demeans other women because of the birth that they experience. And this is what changed, because when I gave birth in 1970 and there was a 4.5% cesarean rate, the maternity system was just not very sophisticated. Now you're going to probably see little flashes of light coming through just as you did. I have a prism outside and the sun might strike it. So just be aware that this is just a crystal hanging up in my patio, and it's going to reflect onto this screen. So when we all, 95% of us in the United States, were having a vaginal birth, and that the natural birth movement says, see, we could all do it, we need to go back and have a reality check about what that really meant. It meant that the maternity system was not terribly sophisticated. The cesarean was major abdominal surgery. We were knocked out, given a general. Husbands couldn't be with us. And babies had a reaction to the general. And those of us who labored, we could labor for hours or days. We could cope or we could suffer. All of us had risks. Those were considered normal and natural. And there wasn't much birth control back then. And tragedies in childbirth were considered normal and natural, and they were accepted, even though they weren't wanted. So the reason that 95% of us labored in 1970 was that the medical profession really couldn't do much about it. And there was an expectation or an acceptance of just this global phenomenon that women have always given birth, and that birth has innate risks to it. And risks rarely become problems, and problems rarely become tragedies. But for each family, the potential for a risk that we might have to become a problem and then to become a tragedy, even though that risk may be tiny, in modern cultures, we became risk averse because that's how we socially distinguish ourselves from women living in countries where there is no medical care, where they're living without electricity and refrigeration or running water or roads or cars, right? Although everybody has a cell phone now, right? So we need to understand that our viewpoint as modern women, which is an entitlement, is that we demanded that the modern medical profession reduce our risks. We do now. We're in COVID. Why is a vaccine being rushed out? Because modern people are demanding that the risks are reduced. Why is the medical community working so hard to stop people from dying from COVID? Because if there was no medical care, or where there is no medical care, many more people would die from COVID. And it's because in modern cultures, we don't accept the risk. Is that good or bad? Our trust doesn't have an opinion about it, because our trust was founded on the premise that when you're pregnant, it's normal and natural to learn skills and to work through your baby's birth journey, no matter where that birth occurs, who's present, your circumstances, beliefs, choices, lack of choices, change of choices, or what happens to you around you. Because we get pregnant to have a baby. We don't get pregnant to have a type of birth. And our baby's birth is important to us. And giving birth is always an activity. Now, the natural birth movement would say, they have for years said to me, a cesarean's not a birth. Of course a cesarean's a birth. It's the birth of our baby. Why isn't a cesarean a birth? The baby's coming out of our body. So you, as a natural birth advocate, believe that a baby has to come out of our vagina. I don't have any opinion. Our trust doesn't have any opinion. The families who developed these skills, if they were going to have a non-laboring cesarean, they'd want to get up and stand up and say, this is my baby's birth, and I don't want you to demean it. And as women, we shouldn't be demeaning each other's births. Right? So you can have a woman who eats well, exercises well, trusts birth, plans a home birth, has a great birth, but her baby dies. You can have a woman with multiple risks, just name them. And she's terrified of birth, and yet she spits a baby out. The baby's fine. There's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And we can't, as women, keep evaluating births. We can't. We have to stop that. But we can only stop it when we change the societal perception about birth. And then changing that perception is something that our trust has tried to do since the 90s, and families asked me to do from the 70s forward, which is to bring forth this concept that it's just normal and natural when you're pregnant to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and then use those skills as you do the activity of birthing your baby. And then people would say, but back to the end, cesarean's not a birth, but it is a birth. And when does that birth really start? Well, it starts as soon as you start to go to the hospital, right? That's your labor. So you can use breathing and relaxation skills. This is your baby's birth. And if you're engaged in the birth of your baby, if you're involved and you're participating using skills, you know why. And the reason you know why is because this is your baby's birth. And as the adult in the room and as the parent in the room, your baby is with you now, and you are using skills to parent this child by doing this activity in a skillful manner. When you're being prepped, this is your transition. You can have emotions like all of us do about the birth. All of us have anxieties, excitements, fears. We don't always like what happens to or around us. Yet we are doing the birth. The surgery is our baby's birth. Even if we're numbed from our breast down, this is still the activity of birthing our baby. Our purpose as a mother, who's the only one doing the birth, as a mother parent, is that we have to do this, whether we like it or not. How many of you who are listening to me today have kids? How many of you have a job? How many of you are in a partnership relationship? How many of you have hated your job periodically or every day? How many of you were just pissed off at your partner for a moment, an hour, a day, a week, months? How many of you just tear your hair out with the behaviors of your children? You don't have to like any of that. However, when we have skills, we cope better, we manage better, we handle things better, we deal with things better, we stay on top of those negative feelings, and we feel more in control. And that's what adults and parents do. And when we raise this conception into a societal expectation, so that you who's listening to this says in your social media platform, says to your friends and others, when you're pregnant, it's normal and natural to self-learn birth skills and then use them to work through the activity of birthing your baby. If you start to do that, if you're a birth professional listening to this, just tell your clients that they have to do this activity. Hand them a sheet of paper with all the skills-based methods. Keep a track from 24 weeks onwards with skills they're learning at each appointment, and encourage them to use skills to work through the activity of birthing their baby. What's the downside of this? What's the downside? There is no downside. What's the upside? The upside is that we value every birth, and we stop having an oppositional conversation between women about birth. We have to stop it. And the only way we stop it is by putting something in place. It's like the old adage, nature abhors a vacuum. That means if you weed your garden, if you don't put something else in its place, the weeds just come back. And really since the 80s, although it started in the 60s, the first childbirth preparation classes ever taught were all skills-based, Lamaze and Bradley, and in New Zealand, Grantley Dick Reed. Yet they were still focused on low-risk women who, by using skills, could achieve three goals: a natural birth, pain-free labor, with no medical intervention. And that wasn't achieved. And that left out so many of us. And that started this oppositional relationship. Those three obstetricians, if they had had foresight, would have just simply said 100% of pregnant women give birth, 100% of pregnant women should have skills, and the purpose of the use of skills is for us to feel involved and engaged in the activity we're doing, to bring our baby out of our body into our arms. And if that activity involves labor pain, which can be excruciating, or things that people do to us or around us that we don't like, or we have an experience that we don't like, when we use skills, we just cope better. We don't suffer as much. We don't have short-term suffering. We don't have long-term suffering. And that's the TABS, the trauma after birth syndrome. I can't tell you how many women say, I'm disappointed with my cesarean. Or I didn't get my VBAC. Do you know what you're saying to your children? I didn't value your birth. When a woman says to another woman, I had a home birth, you had a hospital birth, and a cesarean to boot, it's women not valuing other women. When a woman says, he was my cesarean, she was my VBAC, we're not valuing our children's birth. We've stopped that. For whatever reason you are having a non-laboring cesarean, this is your baby's birth. And your body is still preparing to have a vaginal birth and to labor. So all the hormones, all the emotions, all the changes you're feeling are exactly the same as a woman who's going to labor and end up with a vaginal birth. And so you can use this special time of pregnancy to prepare your body for birth, even though you know you're going to have a non-laboring cesarean. Why not? You can learn the skills together with your partner, your child's father or other family member or friend, and then use those skills on the way to the hospital, being prepped and in surgery, and even after surgery if you have discomforts, and even when you're parenting. Wouldn't it be nice when you want to tear your hair out at your children's behavior that you have good breathing and relaxation skills? I mean, honestly. So I've spent 50 years out in the childbirth arena. And I've come up against the philosophy and the beliefs and the ideology of the natural birth movement that has not wanted to include in its message that it's normal and natural when you're pregnant to self-learn skills and use skills. And that's been astoundingly frustrating. The idea that just because women get pregnant, we know how to do it, is like saying to people, just because you're horny, you know how to be a good lover, or just because you're hungry, you know how to be a good cook. None of that's accurate. What's accurate is that each of us is doing the activity of birthing our baby. And humans thrive on being skilled. We love being skilled. Pregnancy and birth is infrequent. Fewer times than having sex or eating. It's a finite period of time that lasts longer than sex, lasts longer than cooking and eating. Right? It's life transforming. Sex doesn't usually mean that, and nor does having a good meal. And we remember the experience of our baby's birth throughout our life, whereas we don't always remember our intimate experiences, and sometimes we remember some really special meals, but maybe somebody else cooked them for us. So when, as women, we give each other inaccurate information, or we separate childbirth out from our beingness, our what helps us to thrive, which is being skilled, then we do a disservice to one another. And we do a disservice to our partners, our families, our children, and our society. I mean, think about it this way. Imagine that everybody was a good lover and had learned the skills to be that. That would be neat. Imagine that everyone knew how to cook a great meal. Oh, that would be something special. But that's unrealistic. However, it is realistic because birth is infrequent and cannot be replayed the next day. It is really realistic that we now pass on a societal message to one another that when you're pregnant, it's normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and then use those skills to work through the activity of birthing our baby. Because this is our baby's birth. And we know when it starts for having a non-laboring cesarean. That's a lot clearer than labor, which may have this sort of early latent phase before it becomes active. So as a woman having a non-laboring cesarean, we know that as soon as we get into the transportation to go to the hospital, that's the start of our birth. Some of us, however, a day or two before our scheduled cesarean, we really practice the skills to our Braxton Hicks contractions. And we work with our partner so that we really become aligned with the concept, the exciting concept that we are going to use skills to work through this non-laboring cesarean. We know hundreds and hundreds of families that have taken this approach, birthing better families. Why? Because we created skills so that we could be engaged in our baby's birth. No matter where we birthed, no matter who was present, no matter our circumstances or our beliefs or our choices or lack of choices, change of choices, or what happened to or around us. We just saw all of those things as things we might not have any control over, might not like or might want. We might love it, we might hate it. All of those things were what was happening. But the one thing, the true north of the experience, was that we have to do this activity of birthing our baby. 100% of pregnant women will do this activity. And when we do it with a set of even the simplest skills of breathing and relaxation, we always birth better. And what do we remember? We remember our empowerment, our engagement as a human being, as a woman, as a mother, as a parent. And if we have a birth coach who's another human being, who may be a woman or a man, who may be our partner or a friend or a family member, who will be in this child's life, when together we use skills to bring forth this baby, we strengthen our family relationship. So, our expectation as a charitable trust is that you pass this on to other people. You subscribe to our YouTube channel or like our Facebook page, and that you help us grow this concept. Because if we do not grow this concept, we are continuing down the path we are now, which is this massive rise in shame, blame, guilt, disappointment, anger, frustration, and birth trauma so many women feel about their births. We will continue the rise of elective cesareans because we will not have skilled women who know how to cope with the natural occurring pain of labor contractions and don't want to be bothered. We will continue to have this rise in non-laboring cesareans because women remain terrified of birth, and they're being told by the natural birth movement that that fear of birth is abnormal. It's not abnormal. And if you want to know how to deal with it, listen to, I think, the second of this series, because this is a gift. And if you can hold this fear and work within it, just as you do if your baby is sick, right? Or just you do if something happens. We can be afraid of a lot of things, but if we use it as a gift and know how to observe and make judgments and assess, then we are more likely to then bring skills to the circumstances and situations. Okay, so you get this. You now know what you have to do. Pass on this concept that when you're pregnant, it's normal and natural to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and then use those skills as you work through your baby's birth journey. And for those of us who had non-laboring cesareans, it's a day or two before the scheduled surgery. Certainly as we get into the transportation of the hospital, because that's our labor, while we're being prepped, that's our transition, and during the activity of birthing our baby, and afterwards if we need the skills to deal with any discomfort. We want to be engaged. We want to be proud of our baby's birth and of our ability to work through our baby's birth using skills. Simple as that. See you later.